The HOA president stood at the entrance of my ranch, holding a bright red violation notice in her hand, and the first words out of her mouth were, "You have 7 days to remove this cattle guard, or we'll take legal action." I looked down at the paper, then back at her. "You're telling me to remove something on my own land?" She smiled like she had already won. "This neighborhood is standards. That ugly metal gate doesn't match the community's image." What she didn't know was that this cattle guard wasn't just a piece of metal sitting in my driveway. It protected my livestock, kept my property safe, and most importantly, it was fully approved by the county. But Karen didn't care about facts. She cared about control. For months, she had been finding new excuses to come after me. First, it was my fence height. Then it was my old ranch truck parked near the barn. After that, she complained about the sound of my horses in the morning. Every time I followed the rules. Every time I proved her wrong. But this time was different. She had a group of HOA members standing behind her, all staring at me like they expected me to surrender. "You can fight us if you want," she said, stepping closer. "But people like you usually learn the hard way." I stayed quiet and looked at the notice again. 7 days. Remove my cattle guard. A cattle guard that had been there for years. A cattle guard that stopped my animals from wandering onto the road. A cattle guard that the county inspector personally approved. I could have argued right there. I could have yelled back. But I knew something Karen didn't. She had no idea who she was really fighting. I simply folded the paper, placed it in my pocket, and said, "Okay, I'll remove it." Her face changed instantly. She expected a fight. She expected me to beg. Instead, I agreed. Karen looked at the HOA members and laughed. "See? That's what happens when people realize they can't break the rules." She walked away feeling victorious. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't removing the cattle guard because she won. I was removing it because I had a much bigger plan. That night, I sat in my workshop looking at the old cattle guard while my grandfather's words came back to me. "Son, never fight someone who wants attention. Let their own actions expose them." I picked up my phone, opened a file I had saved months ago, and smiled. Because Karen thought she had forced me to give up my property rights, but she had just pushed me into making a move that would change the entire neighborhood forever. The next morning, Karen arrived at my ranch earlier than usual. She wasn't alone. 2 HOA board members followed behind her, and one of them was carrying a camera. I watched them from my porch as they walked toward the entrance like they owned the place. Karen pointed at the cattle guard and said loudly, "I hope you're ready to follow the rules today." I walked outside calmly. "Rules? You mean the ones you made up?" Her smile disappeared for a second. Then she pulled out her phone and started recording. "Everything you say is being documented," she said. "We don't want any confusion when we report this." I looked at the camera, then at her. "Report what?" "That you're refusing to cooperate with the HOA." I almost laughed. Because just a few weeks earlier, she had sent me a letter claiming the cattle guard was dangerous. Then I showed her the county approval documents. After that, she changed her argument and said it was about the neighborhood's appearance. She wasn't trying to fix a problem. She was trying to find a reason to control me. I walked over to my truck and opened the door. Inside was a folder I had prepared the night before. I pulled out a copy and handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked. "The official county approval for the cattle guard." Her face became serious. She looked at the paper for a few seconds, then handed it to one of the board members. He read it carefully. Karen quickly grabbed it back. "This doesn't matter," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "It doesn't matter that the county approved it?" "No," she replied. "The OA still has the final say." That sentence was the moment I knew she had crossed a line, because she wasn't just complaining anymore. She was acting like she had power she didn't actually have. I looked directly at her and said, "You keep saying you control this property, but you've never shown me the rule that gives you that power." For the first time, Karen didn't have an answer. She looked away. Then she changed tactics. "Fine," she said. If you want to play games, we can play games. She walked back toward her car and made a call. I didn't know who she was calling yet, but judging by the smile on her face, she thought she had just found a way to finally defeat me. And she had no idea that the call she was about to make would become the biggest mistake of her life. Karen stood beside her SUV with her phone pressed against her ear, speaking loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Yes, I need someone here immediately. This man is refusing to follow HOA orders, and I'm worried he might become aggressive. I froze for a second. Aggressive? I hadn't raised my voice once. I hadn't stepped toward her. I had simply asked for proof. But Karen wasn't interested in the truth. She wanted a story where she was the victim. The HOA members behind her started whispering. A few neighbors had come outside after hearing the argument. They watched from their driveways, confused about what was happening. One neighbor, Mike, walked over and quietly asked me, "Are you okay? What's going on?" I handed him the approval papers. He read them and shook his head. "She's trying to force you to remove something the county approved?" I nodded. Before I could say anything else, Karen pointed toward the road. There they are. A black SUV slowly pulled up near the entrance of my ranch. Two men stepped out wearing shirts that looked like official security uniforms. Karen walked toward them with confidence. "That's him," she said. "He refuses to obey the HOA and is creating problems for the community." The two men looked at me. One of them said, "Sir, we've been asked to make sure you remove this structure immediately." I looked at their uniforms, then at Karen. "Who exactly are you?" The man avoided the question. "We're here on behalf of the HOA." I smiled slightly. That answer told me everything. Because real authorities don't avoid simple questions. Karen crossed her arms. "You see? Now you understand. This is what happens when people think they're above the rules." She thought she had finally won. She thought bringing these men would scare me into giving up. But there was one thing she didn't know. I had already seen their vehicle arrive. I had already noticed something strange. The license plate didn't match any official county vehicle. And the logo on their shirts? It wasn't from any government department. It was just a cheap patch someone could buy online. I reached into my pocket and quietly turned on my phone's recording. Then I looked at Karen and asked the question she wasn't expecting. "Are you ordering these men to remove my property?" She smiled. "Yes. And are you claiming they have legal authority to do it?" She laughed. "They have all the authority they need." That was the exact sentence I needed. Because Karen had just given me the proof I was waiting for. She didn't know it yet. But the next person arriving at my ranch wouldn't be someone she could intimidate. And when she found out who I had called, her confident smile disappeared completely. I stood there quietly as Karen continued talking, completely unaware that every word she said was being recorded. She pointed at the cattle guard and told the two men, "Remove it today. He doesn't have permission to keep it here anymore." One of the men stepped forward and reached for his tools. That was when I moved between him and the entrance. "Stop." The man looked annoyed. "You don't want to make this difficult." I looked him in the eyes. "No, you're the ones making this difficult by trying to remove something that doesn't belong to you." Karen rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. You think a few papers can protect you?" I reached into my truck and pulled out a folder. Inside were not only the county approvals, but also the original property documents. I opened the pages and pointed to the marked area. "This cattle guard sits completely inside my private property line." The HOA members looked at each other. For the first time, they weren't so confident. Karen grabbed the papers from my hand. "You're hiding behind paperwork," she said. I shook my head. "No, I'm standing on my property." The neighbors watching from across the street started paying closer attention. They had seen Karen threaten people before. They had seen her send warnings. But they had never seen someone challenge her. Karen noticed the crowd growing and lowered her voice. "You're making a big mistake." I looked at her and said, "The only mistake was thinking I would stay silent while you abused your position." Her face turned red. Then she did something I never expected. She pulled out her phone again and made another call. "This man is refusing to cooperate," she said. "I need law enforcement here." A few neighbors gasped, because now it was no longer an HOA argument. She was trying to turn it into a police matter. Within minutes, a patrol vehicle appeared at the end of the road. Karen walked toward it with a confident smile. "There he is," she told the officer. "He's causing problems and refusing to obey orders." The officer looked at me, then at the cattle guard. "Sir, what's happening here?" Before I could answer, Karen interrupted. "He built this without permission and is refusing to remove it." The officer looked confused. Then he asked the question Karen didn't expect. "Ma'am, do you have proof that this property belongs to the HOA?" Silence. Karen opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The officer looked at me. I handed him the approval papers. He read them carefully. Then he looked back at Karen, and the expression on his face changed, because he had just discovered something that Karen had been hiding from everyone. The cattle guard wasn't the problem. The real problem was that Karen had been lying for months. And now she was about to be exposed. The officer finished reading the documents and slowly handed them back to me. "Everything here shows this cattle guard was legally approved," he said. "And it's clearly inside your property line." Karen's confident expression started to fade. "But the HOA has rules," she quickly replied. The officer looked at her. "Rules don't allow someone to remove another person's private property without legal authority." The entire street went quiet. The same neighbors who had watched Karen push people around for months were now watching her lose control of the situation. But Karen wasn't ready to give up. She pointed at me and said, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." I looked at her calmly. "No, Karen. You had no idea who you were dealing with." I pulled out my phone and played the recording. Everyone heard her own words. Her telling those men to remove my property. Her claiming they had authority. Her admitting she was trying to force me to obey something she had no power to enforce. The officer listened carefully. Then he asked the two men a simple question. "Are you officially employed by the county or any government agency?" They looked at each other. Neither answered. A few minutes later, the truth came out. They were just private contractors hired by Karen through the HOA. They had no legal authority to remove anything from my land. But that wasn't the only thing I had discovered. The file I opened that night in my workshop contained months of HOA complaints, emails, and notices. And hidden inside those records was something even bigger. Karen had been sending similar threats to other homeowners. She had been using fake warnings to scare people into giving up their rights. When the HOA board reviewed everything, they realized the problem wasn't my cattle guard. The problem was their own president. Within weeks, Karen was removed from her position, and the HOA was forced to apologize to several homeowners she had pressured. The cattle guard stayed exactly where it belonged, on my land. A few months later, one of my neighbors stopped by and smiled. "You know, when she first showed up, we thought you were going to lose." I laughed. "So did she?" He looked at the cattle guard and said, "What made you stay so calm?" I looked across my ranch at the land my family had worked for years to protect, because I knew the truth didn't need to shout. It just needed time. That experience taught the entire neighborhood a lesson. A title, a position, or a fancy HOA badge doesn't give someone the right to control others. Respect matters. Rules matter. But so do honesty and freedom. Karen thought she was removing a piece of metal from my driveway. She never realized she was building the case that would remove her from power instead.